how you guys did there, and I'll kind of fill in the blanks, and then we can kind of get started on some of these domains. And so, go ahead, take a second, and if you got that up or get it up, so we can kind of go through that and see how you guys did on some of that. Hopefully, when you went through it, you had some of the questions might have been things that we kind of mentioned. I try to focus mostly on the content we covered, so that way you could kind of take that little document with you and kind of run with it and find out, just even through Google searching, just some of what the answers might be if you didn't already know some of them. So let's just go through them real quick and see how you guys did on some of those. Are you guys ready?
Yeah.
All right. So number one, a blank can explain the examine the protocol-based addressing information in network packets and determine the most effective path for the data to take. It can also be used as a filtering mechanism for the network traffic based on certain criteria. What do you guys think that was or is?
I had routers.
Yeah. So definitely the key word and focus there is path. So anytime you see something like that, you kind of think of, well, what's the device out there that can kind of manage paths, in general. But I also wanted you guys to make sure you know that just in general, it can be used as a filter agent as well. So, if it doesn't know how to get somewhere, it gets filtered out in certain circumstances. But then there's also those all-in-one devices that provide routing and filtering capabilities, like your home routers. So, that's why I put that in there. All right, good. So the second one, what device has multiple network ports, combines multiple physical network segments into a single local area network? What'd you guys get for that one?
A set of switch.
Yeah. So the multiple ports kind of gave it away a little bit there.
Yeah.
And the physical, because one of the things that you'll notice is with physical, we think of things like MAC addresses, a physical address. So that might have been another word you could kind of focus on there. All right, number three, any software or hardware device that protects a system or network by blocking unwanted network traffic. What's that?
Firewall.
Firewall, right? So, I was wondering, just to get you guys feedback, what are you? Remember last week we talked about maybe doing a couple things as far as building maybe a virtual lab at home to kind of explore some of these types of things. Did you guys think on any of that anymore, or not quite yet?
I've actually got a tower I'm about to resurrect and try doing a home-based firewall with that thing, but I haven't got around to it yet.
That's awesome. So I think maybe even at the end of these, once everybody kind of has a little bit more time with some of this stuff, I'd love to kind of just have a little hangout or something to talk about setting up a virtual lab if you guys wanted to do something like that. And then in addition to that, we can kind of do things like, I was setting up pfSense today just in my virtual environment just to kind of test some things out. So we could look at something like that as well and be more project-based type of thing as well. So we might look at that later. Anyway, so number four, blank is a practice of spreading out the work among the devices in the network so that by sharing the work, more resources are available and the data gets processed faster. By balancing the workload between devices, all devices in the network perform more efficiently. What's this concept? You guys remember?
Load balancing.
Load balancing, or a load balancer, right? As one of those resources that can do that. It's great for web servers, especially if you've got multiple web servers, you've got a lot of traffic going to those. It's nice to have that balance. But it could also even be used for things like print pooling. So you got multiple printers, you want to put them together and be able to be more efficient at printing, and then you can do something like that. All right, number five, a single network security device used to perform a number of security functions to secure the network. Most devices will contain a firewall, intrusion prevention, load balancing, filtering, and reporting functionality. What could this device be called? I was really looking for an acronym here.
I remember talking about that one last week or last time, but I could not find notes.
Do you guys remember what we said UTM stands for? UTM?
Unified Threat Management.
Right. So with a lot of these devices, you can put a good bit of money into a product like this, but it can offer extensive functionality where it can be not just a simple firewall. It can also do intrusion detection. It can have logging capabilities. All these great things. It can't even do malware eradication. So a lot of different things in a UTM, and that would be kind of in the realm of what that device would be. All right, good. 6 is blank can gather all the information passed through a network or selectively record certain types of transactions based off various filtering mechanisms. What do you think this is?
At first, I didn't know what it was, but I'm going to go with proxy filter, or a filter of some sort at least.
Yeah, so a lot of those are, it could also be, and I was looking really for a SIM. Do you remember the acronym? SIM was a security incident and events management resource that can be used on a network for centralized logging. So you can use it as a mechanism to see possibly people that are trying to log on, but it's kind of they're guessing passwords or something like that, or even down to the point where there's failed updates and stuff like that. All of those things can be you can centralize the management of all your logs through one of these tools. So that's a SIM. But yeah, I mean, it could be also a couple other things there. That's kind of what I was looking at, is something that would monitor for transactions that are happening on the network.
So is that more software kind of side, or is that a hardware-based kind of solution?
So if you think of something like Splunk, for example, Splunk is a software solution that runs on hardware to be able to give you more of a management eye view into things that are happening across the network. And so that's the overall goal. Is it doesn't have to be a hardware solution. It can be a software solution. In fact, even another example might be something like GFI has this thing called Events Management or Events Manager that is used in that kind of scenario as well. So it's not always hardware that we're using. That one's probably more software based. All right, so then that's to number 7. And blank is a detectionary control system that scans and monitors the security infrastructure for signs of attacks in progress. And so here I think the key word to focus on there is a detectionary control.
Is that one IDS?
Yeah, that one's IDS, or intrusion detection system. Good. All right, so let's just step this up a little bit so we can get done. Step number 8, blank has monitoring capabilities of an IDS, but also actively works to block any detected types of threats. So it's a little bit more on the active side of things.
IPS.
IPS,
prevention
right?
system, yeah.
Intrusion prevention. More stepping up a little bit more. Now, it's not to say that one's better than the other, because usually IDSs are great at logging the transactions that are happening, but when it really comes to being more traditional IDS, it doesn't have that preventionary mechanism built in. All right, so then number 10, a blank is a single device, incorporates advanced encryption authentication methods in order to handle a large number of VPN tunnels geared specifically towards securing remote access or site-to-site VPNs. What's this device called?
VPN concentrator.
Yeah.
Yep, VPN concentrator. Good.
Do we skip number 9?
Oh, we might have. I don't know. Did we? Sorry. Yes. A blank monitors suspicious traffic and systems traffic and reacts in real time to block it. I think we did something similar. So IPS, right? So I don't know why I put those two close together.
Okay. See, that one confused me because I was thinking, like, what came to my mind was a next-gen firewall is what I put there, but...
So it might have been. So I can't remember exactly when I was writing that. I should have put an answer key together when I was writing them. So it could be that would be the case. Yeah, you're probably right. So probably 8 is more of a next generation firewall, whereas 9 is more IPS. All right. So then number 11, A blank is a small section of the private network located between two firewalls made available for public access. A DMZ enables external clients to access the data systems on private networks, such as web servers, without compromising the security of the internal network. So what are we talking about here? Kind of trying to confuse you guys a little bit.
That one, the answer for that one is DMZ, right?
Yeah. So I didn't know if we had mentioned that. So I didn't want to specifically give you guys that in case we didn't mention it. But I wanted to kind of throw it in there just in case. So yeah.
The first thing that came to my mind was a honeypot, but it didn't mention, specifically for an outside attacker, somebody who was going to attack it or something for that. So I assume DMZ.
Yeah, it is DMZ. Good. I just probably put a little bit too much in there than I needed to. All right, so 12, a blank is a point-to-point logical network created by grouping select hosts together regardless of their physical location.
I took a stab in the dark and said WAN, but...
Well, I think I was looking for something else.
Is that one VLAN?
Yeah, I think that's the idea for us is the selected host part. Now, the idea is that VLANs themselves, they can span multiple locations. They don't have to be, like say, for example, you might have one portion of the VLAN on the first floor and another portion of it on the fourth floor. So they don't have to all be physically located together, but you do have a way to group them together. So, I think that's probably the answer that I would think would be fit best for there. All right, so for 13, a network design element that is used to divide large networks into smaller logical networks. Each node configured with an IP address and subnet mask in order to segment a network into subnetworks by creating a logical grouping of network devices based on addressing scheme, data flow. Security measures can be managed more easily on a smaller scale. What are we doing here? Remember that word we talked about? We mentioned it. If you ever have to do that process, it's kind of involved.
Subnetting or subnet?
Subnetting. Yeah, subnetting. All right, 14, a simple form of internet security that conceals the internal address scheme from the public internet. A router configured with a single IP address, public IP, on the external interface and a private non-routable address on the internal interface. What's this? It's an acronym in case you just want the acronym.
Is this one NAT?
It is, Network Address Translation. Good. All right. What technology separates computer software from hardware that it runs on via an additional software layer, enables a great deal of additional flexibility, increased hardware utilization, allows you to run multiple operating systems on a single computer, each thinking its own separate entity? It's a big word we use a lot today in computers.
Virtualization.
Virtualization. Excellent. All right. Blank refers to using the cloud to provide applications to users. So there were several different types of clouds out there. This is just one of those clouds. Not the stormy clouds, but one of those clouds. This one was software as a service. As this type of cloud, it provides applications and uses of applications to users. And so they don't have to have the software installed on their local machine. They can access it through the cloud and then, or usually through a browser. Something like Office 365 or Google Apps for Enterprise. Something like that would be an example of something like this. All right, 17, same thing. We're looking for a cloud model. Provides virtual systems such as operating systems to customers to use. What's this one called? It's another as a service.
17, platform.
So the difference, actually 100%. So the difference between platform as a service and infrastructure as a service is infrastructure, we're trying to get more involved with the services side of things. So if I want to have my Active Directory in the cloud, or my DNS in the cloud, or my SharePoint servers in the cloud, stuff like that, then that's more infrastructure. So this is absolutely platform as a service, because it's not specific to what services are being provided. All right, so 18, a service used to collect information from network devices for diagnostics and maintenance purposes. So this is actually a service that we're talking about. We had in there looked at several different application protocols like SSH, FTP. So this one is Simple Network Management Protocol, or SNMP. A lot of times we'll use it to manage various devices like switches, routers, or devices like printers or whatever. Any device that's running and allowing us to interact with the agent to make changes on that device, we can use SNMP as a way to do that. So that's 19. What port does DNS use for DNS queries? Now this is kind of a trick question. I wanted to know if it was TCP or UDP, and I also wanted to know the port number here.
Well, the port's 53, right?
Right. So DNS is one of those weird creatures that basically operates on or has interaction with both TCP and UDP. Whenever it's doing a DNS query, it uses UDP as the protocol for communications, whereas if it is a DNS zone transfer, it uses TCP. Both are 53, so it really depends on what you're trying to allow. If I'm trying to block any kind of DNS queries, then I would block UDP port 53. So that's kind of what that is. All right, 20, a tool used by network admins to security professionals to protect resources from flooding attacks, such as distributed denial of service attacks. Starts with an F, ends with a wall.
Firewall.
Yeah, firewall. So we talked a little bit about what those devices for, but there are specifically firewalls that are designed for dealing with distributed denial of service attacks. All right. 21, technique allowing or denying devices with certain MAC addresses to connect to the network. This may be in the form of a whitelist, in which only MAC addresses specified are granted, or a blacklist, in which certain MAC addresses are explicitly blocked.
MAC filtering.
MAC filtering. All right. Blank refers to a system that centralizes various security techniques, firewalls, antivirus, network intrusion, URL filtering, content inspection, all of those things basically into one appliance. That would be that UTM again. Maybe, I think we had kind of already mentioned that, but I really do see that be a big question that they'll try to want you guys to make sure you know for Security Plus what those UTM devices are for. There's several of them out there on the market. I mean, Checkpoint has them, Cisco has them, so that's the idea of that device. All right, 23. What is the A stand for in CIA? And then give an example.
Availability, being able to access say you're working remotely, you're able to get to a file.
Sure, sure. So availability, you know, a classic example I think about that's great. Any kind of systems you put in place to provide that resiliency to be able to access the files, absolutely necessary. But think of a backup. A backup is a classic example of something like this. If we didn't have backups and our data was to become corrupted or whatever, that availability would be totally lost. And so with security, CIA is a corner foundation of security. And so anything that we make a decision on, kind of like a core value, we always put it to the CIA test. Does it match with principles of security like CIA? All right. Which TCP port does LDAP use? So LDAP is a communications protocol used for querying, and it could be that there is a database that you have a web front end that's pulling information from a database. So usually that communications on the back end, if it is LDAP driven, uses port 389. So 389 is the default port there. There is other versions, like Secure LDAP uses 636, I think. But you do, for the test, for Security Plus, want to know a good bit of those port numbers. All right, 25, what is the secure way to remotely administer a Linux system? So we're looking for a security alternative to, like, Telnet, for example.
SSH?
Yeah, secure shell, 100% hands down the way to go when we want to make sure we're doing a secure connection. A lot of times you'll see, still today, believe it or not, I can't understand it, but you'll still see Telnet a lot out there, and or even VNC, some other things. So whatever we look at when we look at securing resources, we want to make sure that make the best decision for security's sake, and so SSH is the best option. Your boss has asked you to implement a solution that monitors users and limits their access to external websites. Which of the following is the best solution of the four?
The proxy server.
Yeah, because it's kind of a tricky question here, because you think maybe it's an IDS, but we're looking to also limit their access and maybe even block their access. And so mostly a proxy server is great at some of those things. You can even set with things like a Bluecoat's proxy. You can set it where the K9 version. You can give your kids limits. So if you know the MAC address of their Android tablet or their iPhone or whatever it is, you can say that they can have access to the internet from 8 to whatever, and kind of control that level of access. Plus, you can also whitelist sites or blacklist certain sites or certain content. So we're looking at a proxy server as our best option there. You want to reduce network traffic on the particular network segment to limit the amount of user visibility. Which of the following is the best device to use in this scenario? So we're trying to break up the overall domain here of the network.
We went with a hub for that one.
Well, so the thing here with a hub, though, it pulls everything together. And if we want to segment it out, and if I'm looking around to try to connect, if I want to do like a VLAN, right, all of that stuff has to be done with a switch, right? So that's why switch is our best option here to be able to break up the network into segments and limit the visibility. Now, of course, if we can go and purchase more devices, then maybe we can go a different route, but right now it doesn't mention that, so switch is our best option. Which of the following is used when performing a quantitative risk assessment? So we'll look at some of this tonight for sure, because that was maybe one of the things talked about in the domains, but whenever you do a quantitative risk assessment, you have to pull in metrics that are number driven. So one of the metrics that's number driven that's listed here is asset value. So if we want to find out overall how much risk is involved in a scenario, we need to understand what is the value to that asset, not only to the bad guy, because there's lots of good stuff on there, but then also to the company if they were to lose it, right? All right. True or false, using web encryption stronger than WPA because it uses 128-bit encryption? Kind of a trick question. Yeah, it's false. So doesn't matter. The way that you implement encryption is 100% the reason that web encryption is inefficient today. And so WPA was a replacement for WEP because at the time, the way that WEP was implemented, it was like saying taking a strong level of encryption and then watering it down. And so in this case, we obviously know that. And there's tools out there like WebCrack, so it's pretty seriously broken if there's tools out there named after it. All right, so 30, blank is a document that follows the evidence as it travels from person to person during a computer forensics investigation.
Chain of custody?
Yep, chain of custody. All right, just a few more here. Blank is used as a way to prevent piggybacking within the organization, requires the person to allow the door to shut behind them before they can proceed through the next door. And Josh, if you go to Blue Cross in their data center, you'll see one of these.
Mantrap.
Mantrap, it is. Let's see what else they got here. All right, 32. The most expensive DR site provides a mirror copy of your data center. What is that called or referred to as? So the key word here is exact duplicate or mirror of your environment. It's called a hot site. Hot site. All right. What threat is the most concerning? Because there's no preventative measure available to apply to the vulnerable server.
0 day.
0 day. So I was hoping you guys would get that one. That was one that they do test on, and one that is a big cause for concern. I mean, look over the past months to the summer to when that Italian firm, the hacking team, got hacked, and there was all kinds of 0 days, and then all the companies like Adobe were out there, flailing to try to get the updates there so that they could, fix some of those 0 days that were out there. So that's a big cause for concern for a lot of companies. All right, 34, a purchase order, a blank purchase order. The customer will make with its supplier, which contains multiple delivery dates over a period of time, often negotiated to take advantage of a predefined pricing structure, normally used when there is a recurring need for expendable goods. So this is almost like a service that in government, a lot of times this is done as a way to say there's going to be an extended need for your services over a period of time. It's almost like you're a contractor, but there's a particular acronym that they give and or name they give for this type of purchase contract or invoice, if you like. You might get this one. So this was called a BPA, a blanketed purchase agreement or blanket purchase order. So a lot of times it's used in government. It's kind of on the same level. I think it was in the objectives for the course under things like SLA. There's all kinds of different contracts out there that it might be important for you to know. There's also another one called the what is it called? Operational License Agreement, or OLA. So there's some things there that they had mentioned as far as acronyms are concerned. All right, so 35, a blank systematic movement of employees from one job to another within the organization as a way to achieve many different human resource objectives, such as orienting new employees, training employees, enhancing their career development, and preventing job boarding or burnout. What is this known as, this process? It's called job rotation. Job rotation. Kind of. Now, this is some of the good things it gets. If a company has a policy in regards to this, these are all the good things. But one of the other things that a company gets out of it is if they're trying to discover any kind of fraud or attempts at fraud, this is a great way for them to kind of look at, see how somebody is doing what they do on a daily basis, and then seeing if there's anything that might be done more efficiently, or that there is any kind of cause for concern of what they might be doing. Cooking the books or whatever. All right, 36, a concept of having more than one person required to complete a task. In a business, the separation by sharing of more than one individual in a single task is an internal control intended to prevent fraud or error. What was this called?
Separation of duties.
Yeah, separation of duties. So oftentimes, you wouldn't want the same person that is managing application or services, or the same person that's building an application auditing their environment, because there's a chance that maybe they don't see the problem to what they're actually doing, or in this case they try to push it in their favor. So there's always this is almost adding a kind of a checks and a balance to things in networks today. All right, just a few more true or false. When mitigating vulnerabilities for the organization is done solely by applying strong technical controls. What do you guys think there? Does technical controls always, is that always the best measure?
I said false.
Yeah, so believe it or not, there's several things. You've got administrative controls, like policies that basically govern how the organization wants to manage their selves. There is also physical controls, like locks on doors or security guards. So it's not just technical controls that basically win out the day. All right, if traffic is not explicitly permitted, then it is denied, is the concept of
Explicit deny.
implicit deny.
Implicit.
So if it's not explicitly permitted, then it's basically just not allowed. And so implicit deny is that concept, whereas if we can't 100% say it's allowed, then it's denied. So that's a great way. A lot of firewalls follow that same principle when they're using their rules and calculating their rules. All right, blank is a predicted elapsed time between inherent failures of a system during operation. This is another one of those acronyms that they threw in there. So it's MTBF, mean time, MTTF, excuse me, mean time to failure. So a lot of times, we plan for the worst, and so vendors will actually have that if you run a particular resource like a hard drive, day in and day out, 24 hours a day, whatever it is, there's a certain deadline for when it's expected to expire, and so we want to plan ahead as a part of our availability and our disaster recovery strategy to not have to worry about that inherent failure that's going to happen, it causing us any kind of adverse effects in the network. And then the last one, the method of attacker that uses to get access to a target. What is this known as? I was looking for attack vector. Specifically, a lot of times that's really you're just trying to find out, how's a bad guy doing what they're trying to do. A lot of that is, focused on trying to figure out what were the methods that they used to be able to carry out the attack. That's the attack vector, right? All right, good enough. So we'll probably kind of continue that, just going through and looking at some of those. I'll try to probably, because I don't know, next week I have to teach a class out of town, so I don't know if we're going to be able to meet up next week or not, and depending on the holidays for everybody, we'll just have to play it by ear as far as the week of Christmas. But I'll be getting together next week, the same thing as a review for some of the content that we kind of go over tonight for the remaining domains. All right, so tonight I want to start looking at a few things here. You guys got any questions before we get started here? I'm going to kind of jump into chapter 2 and 3 probably is what we'll probably cover mostly tonight. All right, so looking at the first domain, it doesn't, or second domain, excuse me. It doesn't really look like there's too much of a question. I'll give you guys a second here to look for through 2.1, if you've got it up already, the exam objectives. Some of that was questions that we asked tonight, but just looking at the summary of things that are asked, if you guys had questions on any of those, this would be a good time to kind of bring it up. Any of that through 2.1 before we get into 2.2. Looking at it, some of the questions we even had tonight were off of that, so should be okay on some of those things. All right, so I guess I want to start at 2.2 because there were some questions there, and you guys be thinking or looking at 2.1 if there's something else that comes up there. But the first thing under 2.2 that it talks about is onboarding and offboarding business partners and or employees. And so one of the things that we should probably start as a discussion is kind of starting to think about, and this is a more of administrative when it comes to creating things like policies that govern some of this. Let's start thinking about, from a company perspective, what are some of the causes for concerns of onboarding employees? What do you guys think? If you're onboarding employees, what's the #1 type of policy that you want to make sure you have as a company? What do you guys think? For me as a company, And we're doing a little bit of this right now, trying to make sure that we understand what is the ideal candidate for an employee. I think it's important to understand that in onboarding, there's a lot of background checks and stuff like that that have to play out to make sure that in this case, one, that you get the right person for the job, and or two, that the person's going to be more of a long-term person. Anytime you hire somebody, as long as you hire somebody on, I think, and this is just my personal opinion, it can be different. I think if you can hire somebody that has good character, right, the learning aspect of it, it just comes over time. So if I have someone that I'm interviewing, I always look to try to find, are they going to be a good corporate fit or good cultural fit for the organization that I'm working for? Because I could care less if he understands how to basically get to the command line or whatever it is. None of that matters to me. What matters to me is, does he like Star Wars? Or does he like Star Trek? No. But you get it. The idea is, does he going to fit good and is he teachable, right? Some of those types of things are what are the things I look for. So as a company, if they're onboarding somebody, I think for sure the thing that they're going to look at is, from a background perspective, if they send a resume, is the resume just an out, is it factual stuff? Are they trying to get a job? I wouldn't put on my resume SQL if I didn't know SQL, right? Or at least somewhat of SQL. So those are some of the things. Plus, also, I can't say that I have a degree if I don't have a degree. Those types of things. So a lot of businesses in the onboarding process, they're trying to make sure that they make the best decision for the company based off the information they have. And there's a lot of things that go into that, right? From a background check perspective, you could be asked to, depending on how sensitive and secretive your job role might be, you might have to go in and do a polygraph or do, have credit checks and all these other things that might be a part of that onboarding process. But also think about offboarding as well. So if you move from this company to another, one of the big things there you have to concern is, do I go through the proper steps to make sure that that person leaves the company on good grounds? So are they going to come back and they're going to try to do something like a logic bomb or something that basically causes havoc in the environment and tries to be that disgruntled employee? Or in this case, do you properly go through and take away their keys and all their access and all that stuff? So there has to be these steps for both the onboarding process and the offboarding process. And that rolls right into the next one too, because even in a job interview today, I would be hesitant to say that you probably will be asked, how do you keep up on some of the things that you are applying for a position in? So if I am applying for a security position, if I don't know who Brian Krebs is, if I don't understand maybe of some of the things that are out there tool-wise, then I might be okay in a lower position. But if I know some of that stuff and I start building up that cred in the interview, that's very useful stuff. So sometimes, and where I'm going with that is, they'll even ask for things like, to look at your social media, right? Have you guys heard that? Like, some businesses, they want to be able to, see if you are a good buy for them, so to speak. Not that you have 1,500 followers or anything like that, but they want to see if you're posting things that could be, potentials that could be detriments to them as an organization, or any kind of negativity and stuff like that. They might look at some of those things from a social media perspective.
Yeah, to speak to that, actually, we're getting ready to implement a social media policy that allows our company to look at any, I think it's stated in the policy, publicly accessible sites, which of course would be social media or other. So.
Yeah, I'm trying to think, and I didn't get a chance to. I should have had time to try to tweet something about it. But there was who was the lady that she before she got on the plane, she was going over to Africa, and this is horrible. And she had mentioned something about, I'm going to Africa, I hope I don't get AIDS. And over the course of her going over to Africa, she got all this hate, right, on Twitter and all this stuff. And then as soon as she got off the plane, she got fired. So obviously you don't want somebody that's going to be just totally, off the chain, so to speak, when it comes to that, because that's a public persona. Because a lot of times they'll find out, what company you work for and those types of things, and a lot of companies want to steer clear of that, I'm sure. All right. So, what can you guys tell me about interoperability agreements? That's a fancy term for, like, I'm trying to remember. I don't want to say co-location agreement, but reciprocal agreement. Have you guys heard that term before? So a lot of times as a company, you might, from a disaster recovery strategy perspective, you might have somebody that is in a similar line of business of yours, and you might want to, in this case, be able to lean on them a little bit if a disaster was to take place. So to offsuit some of the costs that would be involved in you having to, afford your own disaster recovery site, you might have a partner, and in that business relationship you have with that partner, they could agree to allow you the infrastructure and or the office space to be able to allow you, in the case of a disaster, to do business with them. And then also you would reciprocate that agreement and say, in this case, if you have a disaster, then we would allow you guys some of the space and some of our infrastructure to be able to use in the case of those disasters. So I think a lot of that is what they're kind of mentioning in this section here. All right. So looking into as well, they talk about the idea of a service level agreement. So service level agreement is whenever you go into an agreement or a contract with a third party vendor, what level of service availability is there, and it's always measured in nines. And so the more service availability that we want, of course it costs more money, but the higher the number of nines that we have, and that greater that availability for us provides us a certain assurance. And that's the idea of a service level agreement. A lot of times is it's just providing a contract that it states basically clearly in black and white what would happen if that service was not available. And it might be that they would credit your account or whatever it is, but that's the idea there solely of a service level agreement. And of course the blanket purchase agreement, we talked about that. That was one of the questions that we had just had there. All right, so then moving along, they do talk about, as far as from a business perspective, when it comes to dealing with third parties, think about privacy considerations. That's a big one that they mentioned in this section, and especially when it comes to where you have contractors coming in, right? I'm sure you guys have probably heard of things like NDAs before. That would probably also fall under this, even though I don't see it there. So as a contractor, I might come into an organization and I might have a high level of access in that organization because of the certain tasks that I'm trying to accomplish. And so because of that, I might, as a vendor, want to have to sign some type of privacy agreement. Or if I'm ever doing a pen test, one of the first things that they'll ask you is to redact some of this content that's put into a pen test report, because it contains things like usernames and passwords and stuff like that. So you'll come across sensitive information, and as an organization, you want to know how to deal with vendors that are going to be interacting with that sensitive information as well. All right, so I'm going to let you guys talk a little bit here. What can you guys tell me about data ownership? Right? What's the concept there of who is the owner of the data?
Kind of sheds a little bit of light on who's responsible for it, who's going to be accessing it, how it's going to be used.
Yeah, I 100% think so. So whenever you're looking at the roles and the responsibilities of the organization, one of the big roles that we have to make sure that is addressed from a security perspective is who is the data owner. What is their scheduled responsibilities with the data? And so, a data owner might have to interact with data custodians. So data custodians, another role that's there, that they're not supposed to be the person that makes the end-all be-all responsible decisions on what to do with the data. They're there to back up the data, but they'll still have access to the data. so they still have to work with the environment as well. But the data owner, this is the person that's ultimately responsible for how the data gets managed in the organization.
That goes hand in hand with data classification, right?
It does. It does. All right. So some other ones, small ones there. They talk about, of course, following security policies. I really don't have much to mention there. So then I guess jumping on to 2.3 there, because that was another one that was somebody wanted to know about. So let's talk about change management. What can you guys tell me? What is change management and why is it so important? Give me some examples or anything. What do you guys think?
So one of the things that we've kind of started at work is if we go to, I don't know, take a server down or do an update or something like that, we have kind of established a policy that we notify users or, at least ask when can we take things down or try to confer with them.
Sure. And that makes sense. So change management basically is a documented policy or procedure that you follow, and anytime any change wants to happen in the organization. And it all starts with the request for a change. And so if, let's say in this case I need to open up some ports on the firewall, well, it's not as easy, or maybe it is as easy as going over and opening up those ports on the firewall, but if you do that and there's no documentation that's involved with that process, if you get hit by a big out-of-space meteor or something, or you go on vacation, you get fired or whatever, there's no documentation to why you actually made that change, right? And or how to make that change. A classic example of this, we have we do all kinds of different small businesses, big businesses, whatever, we don't care. So we had an insurance agency, and they basically had a firewall set up there that had custom ACLs and all kinds of different customizations that were set for it. Well, they had found out for some reason they had thought that they had bought only a few licenses for the firewall to grant access to the internet. So what they did was they literally went and pushed the reset button on the actual firewall and opened everything up. And so now, if they didn't have any backups at all for the firewall, everything is just wide open, and there is no control that's being applied in that environment. And so nobody knows that. If there's no way to track any changes that are taking place in the environment, that's what we're trying to alleviate with change control. Another example would be if I go in and I create like a group policy object and I set all these different settings, and I don't comment on, well, why did I do this or why did I do that, and I don't have a documented process to basically document or audit what changes I made, then I leave the company, next person comes on, they have no idea, so they turn everything back to enabled, and it causes all kinds of grief in the company. Than anything else to make sure that we have a documented process of why we're doing what we're doing. What can you guys talk to me about with regards to incident management? All of these, by the way, are measures of risk mitigation, ways to lower the risk to the environment. What can you guys tell me about incident management? Well, it's the same thing. Incident management is just a process as well. And the process is we want to make sure that the way that we handle the incident is done in a measurable way to not contaminate things. And so you think of like a typical crime scene today. You got blood everywhere, and now you've walked through some of the blood or whatever it is, and now you've contaminated the crime scene. Now, of course, we're not talking about that with computer forensics. With computer forensics, you go walk up to the computer, and you think the computer is infected or has some kind of something malware, whatever related, and you pull the power cable. And so that's not the best situation because now you've just lost some of the evidence that might be a part of that that's stored within memory. And so incident management is how do you deal with an incident? Going through proper channels, making sure you understand things like order of volatility, making sure you understand the concept there of proper evidence collection and evidence collection procedures, and not contaminating evidence. That's really all a big part of what incident management is. But it's also managing people too. So like if I'm a first responder, a first person on the scene of a crime, I want to be able to make sure that I know how to manage that crime scene. Going through and making sure I label things, making sure I wear gloves so I don't contaminate the crime scene, making sure I interview people that might be around the crime scene. Those are all things that a first responder would do in a computer incident response. All right. Another thing here that it mentions that might help us in reducing or mitigating the risk to the environment is user rights and permission reviews. So, what do you guys think that probably is? What's the goal there of evaluating users' rights and/or permissions?
Making sure that a user that downloads CryptoLocker doesn't have domain-wide access to all pertinent files.
Right, right. So, yeah, things like that could spread like a nightmare. So, the idea would be, and this happens. You guys heard of like privilege creep? Privilege creep is whenever a person starts like in the mailroom, and then over time, as they move from this department to that department to this department, if we're not governing and stripping away and evaluating that level of access that user has, by the time they get to retirement, they basically have the same level of access as the senior managers or whatever it is, because they have so many different roles that have built up over time and that nobody has evaluated. And so one big problem is, do we have too many domain admins, right? Do we have too many enterprise admins? And so evaluating those level of access is definitely something that has to be done. And it's not just the access rights and stuff like that, but it's also the permissions, because over time, permissions just grow out of control. You know, if I'm the owner of something, I might give everybody permission. So is that stuff allowed or not allowed? Obviously, if we have a better control over things, then we'll mitigate the risk by evaluating those types of things. It talks about performing routine audits here. That's just, I don't really have much to say other than that's a great thing. Some places have to yearly go through an audit from a compliance perspective. We're working with a client right now, a pretty big vendor here that is a TV station, which is kind of interesting. So they have lots of cool equipment to play around with and test. So yeah, that's been pushed down to them from the government to basically go through a yearly audit. And so that's where we're at with them, is trying to help them through that process. What do you guys hope? What do you think the big goal of an audit, though, is? What do you guys think? Big.
I think with enough audits, it's going to just foster compliance, I would say.
Yeah, I think over time. So what happens over time? I actually take it back. Let's say the biggest concern with a lot of businesses is the not known. Right? How can I get better at security? Right? If I don't know, what my assets are, right, for my environment, and so I might not know how bad things really stink until I start going and evaluating our systems. Right? All right, and then the last thing there under 2.3 that I think is definitely important to understand is data loss prevention. What can you guys tell me about data loss prevention, or DLP? Yeah, that's definitely true. So the name kind of gives it away a lot. So ultimately, though, the goal is discovery of data. So if we go back to the auditing concept again, if we don't know that users are emailing out sensitive data, if we don't know that stored on the desktop is sensitive data, then, well, we just don't know. And so ultimately, the process here of getting to the point where we're managing and/or basically trying to mitigate a risk by having a managed structure in place that governs access to data. And so, if I'm accessing an intranet web portal, then that content that's stored there, if I try to download it, it has to be encrypted, right, with a password or something like that. If I want to print something off, I only can print it off on these printers, or maybe I can only save the data or read the data. So any of the information, the big cause for concern here is when you have USBs, right, in your environment, there's a great chance for people going off and plugging in a USB and exfiltrating all the data. And so are we monitoring for what type of interactions are happening on the network and allowing or not allowing those types of transactions? So when it comes down to it, a DLP solution, yeah, a lot of people call it a fancy regex, and it is, because it's looking for things like social security numbers, it's looking for credit card data, all these types of things. Where you're storing it and how you're storing it are all the important things. It's all about data discovery when it comes to DLP. All right. So then let's get into 2.4. Order of volatility. So basically, order of volatility is used in forensics to make sure that when you capture the data, that you don't, the way that you capture the data is done starting with the items that are most volatile and moving towards the items that are least volatile. So things like stuff that's stored on your clipboard, right? When you copy items, that content is very volatile. And so if the system was to be restarted or reset, then the contents that store in your clipboard would get erased. So we always look for capturing the cache and capturing things like content stored in your clipboard, network access. So whenever you create connections, those connections that are stored as a part of memory and what we call process to port mapping, that content is volatile and will get destroyed if the computer gets rebooted. So order volatility is just a way to make sure that we capture things in a manner of forensics or forensically sound. Now they do mention here capturing system images. So I'm going to give you guys two tools to kind of look into a little bit this week. Look into a tool called Encase, which is made by an organization called Guidance Software Solutions. And then there's also one by Access Data called FTK. Both of these are very popular from a forensics perspective. SLED, the Computer Crimes Division, they use Encase very exclusively whenever they do this capturing of the system image. And when we say capturing the system image, we're not just making a backup, right? So if I make a backup, does it make a backup of the deleted items? No. It could care less about what's been deleted. So what we want to do is we want to create what is known as a bit level copy, right? So we got to have special software that allows us the ability to go through the process of capturing every single bit that is on the actual computer. And so we're capturing deleted partitions, we're capturing deleted files, we're creating and we're capturing everything, not just a few directories like you get with a backup. So everybody that does forensics has to create what is known as a bit level copy. Now an important aspect of that, which I really don't see here, is in addition to that, when you capture that data, you've got to be using what is known as a write blocker, because what will happen is if you're not using a write blocker and you're capturing that image, there's a good chance for contamination. So we want to make it where the hard drive, let's say for example, as we copy that hard drive, the contents as it's getting copied, there's no chance whatsoever that that content is actually going to get written to the disk. We're only reading the disk. So it's almost like back in the days when we had the floppy disk and we had that little window and you could push up the little window and make it read-only. That's what we're doing with a write blocker. And most forensics professionals, they use both a software write blocker, which you can use inside of things like Encase or FTK, and they also use a hardware write blocker. So you got the best of both worlds. You're not worried about contaminating the data if you're using a write blocker. All right. In addition to that, and they do mention that here as well, after we capture the system image, we want to hash it. And why do we want to hash it? You guys know what hashing is? Let's talk about that for a second, because that'll be a big part. What's hashing?
It's along the lines of authenticating size and making the data copy 1 identical to copy 2.
Right. So it's almost like it's a characteristic, right? If I take a hash of this hard drive and I take an image of that hard drive and put it on a separate hard drive, if I get the same hash on both drives, then that means I have an exact copy of that drive. Does that make sense? So with hashing, that's important in a computer forensics investigation. Anywhere that we can erase doubt in a court is what the goal is. And so if we're taking a hash of a disk on both sides and we're getting the same values, there's no way that can call any kind of concern for the actual contamination of the disk, because it's the exact same copy.
And so that comes into play, like you're saying. So when you take a bit level copy, the hash is generated. It's a mathematical equation, I assume. So what, like you're saying, if you take a bit level copy, the zeros and ones are exactly the same.
Exactly. Yep. Everything there, it's a digital fingerprint. So there's no way to say that this fingerprint is different. Now the problem here is, and it doesn't mention it here, we're not really talking about it, but there are certain hashing algorithms that have this type of, I don't want to call it transaction, but this type of interaction that can happen called a collision, and you don't want a collision. Because what a collision is the idea of a hash is that every time the hash goes through its mathematical process, it creates a totally random set of bits. And so if in this case it is that way, there's always a chance for us to get a unique way to represent the input to what is the output, right? But if we're able to take two different inputs that are different from each other and it resolve to the same output, then that's a problem, because now you don't have that unique one-to-one relationship. So MD5, for example, is prone to collision attacks, right? So a lot of law enforcement, they don't accept MD5 hashes anymore. They're using the secure hashing algorithm versus the MD message digest. All right, so another thing they mention here is when you're on the scene of a crime, you're going to do things like capture video, you're going to take screenshots. What do you think all the goal of something? You're going to talk to the witnesses. What are you trying to do here? Now, this is all first responder types of duties, but imagine kind of, if you would, what you're trying to accomplish by doing all these things.
Preserve the crime scene.
Sure, 100%. So if I have a bunch of USB cables plugged in and I don't go through the process of labeling them out, when I get taking that equipment and everything, all that evidence back to the crime lab, and I try to put it all back together, I want to have it exactly the way it was at the scene of the crime, right? So in the case here, we would do things like label all of the cables. We would take anything that might be a cause for concern, like a cell phone, and we would stick it in. If you go to Paraben Forensics, they have several different evidence kits, and some of the evidence kits they have, you put the evidence in these bags so that there's no outside interference. So if somebody was trying to send a remote kill to the phone to try to erase the evidence on the phone, they wouldn't be able to do something like that. So overall, a first responder is going to have to do all those things. It's going to have to, take picture screenshots of making sure everything, in this case, is matching up to the way it was at the original crime scene. Tracking man hours and expenses, again, that's going to be a testable term. For us, the idea would be ultimately to make sure that if you're doing it from a contractual basis, you got to get paid. So that's a big part of that, I think. And I think that's pretty much it from a forensics perspective. I don't see anything else that they mention here. They do talk about analyzing network logs. Obviously, we want to be able to track if the attack is ongoing. We want to be able to find out what the IP address is, all those types of things, maybe figure out what the actual malware does. So it can get a lot more complex to what we actually do from a forensics perspective. One thing that I do know that they'll test you on is making sure you know what the chain of custody is. As we got this document that basically follows the evidence as it progresses from capturing it on the scene of the crime and then all the way up through it being dispositioned after the evidence is used in court. All right, anything there on 2.4 you guys see? I don't see anything else there. So then 2.5 really talks about how do we deal with incidents. So one big part of that is preparing for an incident. And the best way to prepare for the incident is to come up with a strategy, a plan, a process. So a big part of that is going to have to be getting together a formalized team that is going to be your incident response team. So that's the first step, right? And that can be the idea of the incident response team is that they can be members from several different areas. They don't all have to be IT related. They can be members of different departments, because in this case, it might help us when we're trying to collect evidence to have those different points of views. Maybe I have people that can interact better at interviewing employees in that section where the incident actually took place. So a lot of times, the incident response and building up the incident response team, it's not always just IT or security. Now, a big part of this that is going to be important for us, understanding the incident response process and procedure, is making sure that we understand the concept of escalation and notification. So if an incident takes place, who do we contact? Do you guys know who handles computer crimes?
I'm going to assume SLED.
So you would, but the FBI local field office and the Secret Service are our two people that manage incidents for us, and we have both of those. Secret Service is off of Broad River. So those are the parties that we would, and there's also, and I can't remember the link for us tonight, but there's a place where you can go and fill out, I think it's off the FBI.gov website, a complaint form. So some of those are the things that we would have to have in our incident response policy that we build. And then escalation would be, after we start looking at the incident, if we're not allocated enough as a incident response team to be able to handle the incident, if we don't follow the proper procedure for handling the incident, then we might muck up some of the evidence. And so escalation means we go a step further and try to bring somebody in that can help us through the process of incident response. And maybe it is SLED, right? Because they deal with these things all the time. They might be properly more equipped to be able to handle the order of volatility or some of those types of things, right? All right, so I think the biggest thing here, of course, they talk about mitigation steps. That's what we do after we go through the process of collecting evidence, and how do we kind of isolate the environment. Overall, in a incident response, that's the most important thing, is how do I isolate the actual incident. The lessons learned is what could we have done better, and so what can we do now, almost as an after-action report that we can do right now as a business so that this does not happen to us again, right? A couple other things here that they talk about. Of course, we already mentioned the first responder. That's going to be the person that's going to be on the scene of the crime as the mobile forensics toolkit guy person that's going to be collecting the evidence, going to be quarantining the area, going to be interviewing people at the scene of the crime, that type of thing. And I guess that's pretty much it. I don't really know what else they want you guys to know there from 2.5. So it looks like 2.6, 7, and 8, nobody had any questions there. I'm going to give you guys a second to look over those and just see if you see anything in there that sticks out like a sore thumb, so we can finish out with the 2.9. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and jump on into 2.9 real quick. I'll give you a couple things to think about here. So basically here they actually talk about the goal of security. And the goal of security, if you ever hear anybody talk about that, especially for Security Plus, basically the goal of security is to provide confidentiality, to provide integrity, and to provide availability in everything that we do. No matter what our decisions are, we try to fit into security one of those types of things. And so when looking at that, we think confidentiality, the first thing we think is, oh, well, what is confidentiality? It's the ability for us to basically only allow certain parties access to resources, right? Authorized parties. And how do we do that? Well, encryption is one of those measures. And so if we go through and encrypt an item, using something like, let's say like ROT3, right? ROT3 is a shift cipher. And what it does is it takes the alphabet and it moves the characters 3 positions. And so if we take plain text and we move and we say that we're going to use ROT3, we move all those characters 3 positions and we come up with what is ciphertext. And as long as the party that we're communicating with is the only party that knows that we're using that method of security, then they're the only person that's going to be able to decrypt that content. And so encryption is a great way to kind of go through the process of setting up confidentiality for security. Confidentiality can also be done through access services. So we can use something like biometrics, and unless you have your fingerprint and you put that fingerprint on a pad to be read, and then it's you that it's validating against, then that can allow you also confidentiality services. So go real quick. There's a cool site. Let me see. I don't have somebody share it out for me. Spammimic.com is the website, and basically Spam Mimic shows you a classic example of steganography. So basically, steganography, what it is, it's under that same camp of confidentiality or confusion. Basically, you take some input, and then with that input, you kind of hide it by using either a picture or by using audio files or video files. And the example of Spam Mimic, you basically take a message, and you can basically transfer it, or I'd say hide it is a better word, inside of spam, so that you send it to somebody. And then the person gets that spam message, and if somebody intercepts it, they say, oh, this looks like junk mail, and they just discard it, and they don't really look into it anything. But then if you and the party that you're communicating with know that you're using that channel for communications, they could go to that site and decode the message. So a lot of, bad groups, like, terrorist groups, they use steganography because they know that as long as they keep the communications channel that's causing confusion, then they can offer a level of security by doing some of that. So with steganography, you can hide stuff in pictures. Bad guys can hide malware inside of pictures, and so when you open up the picture, even though you're looking at a picture which looks like an ordinary picture, it actually has the malware, right? And so steganography can also be used for confidentiality of services. All right, and then integrity. So what can you guys tell me with computer security and or data in general, what do you think integrity provides us?
And unchained, like a message being delivered
validation?
As it's intended?
Yeah, as it's intended, absolutely. So I know you guys have seen somewhere, maybe on some electronic equipment or somewhere, you've seen the tape that goes across the opening of the device. That tape serves a purpose, right? So if you take it somewhere and you try to get that device serviced, if they've noticed that you've cut the tape or something like that, that's you've been into that device in this case, and then maybe it's voided your warranty, maybe not. So integrity provides us a mechanism of checks and balances to say, in this case, that the data has been validated, in this case, and hasn't been altered since its original sending of that data over to the party. And ways we do that, digital signature is a classic example. So a digital signature, I could have an email I wanted to send to Corey or something like that. So what I could do is I could use my certificate to actually go through a process of encrypting something that would validate that it come from me. And so Corey opens it, and he decrypts that validator, and he can say, yep, sure enough, when I take this message and I put it through this calculation, I come up with that same number, so it must be coming from that person. But then not only does it provide integrity, it also provides non-repudiation. So the only way that he would be able to unlock that secret code that I sent him was by using my public key. And so, when he unlocks it with my public key, the reason that he can unlock it is because I signed it and I encrypted that contents with my private key. And so by doing that, he knows that, well, hopefully, Ralph is the only person that has his private key, so it must have been coming from him. So it provides an integrity check by using the digital signature. And we use certificates for all of this stuff. So certificates are used as transactions for authentication, but they're also heavily used with integrity. And of course, we already mentioned hashing earlier. A good tool to play around with hashing a little bit is you can use a tool called HashCalc. That's HashCalc. And then just play around with it. You'll figure it out. It's when you install it, you can actually choose string and then go through a process there of typing in a password, for example, and then calculating what the hash values would be. Then what I would challenge you to do is change one of the characters on your password and see how dramatic the difference is of the hash that was calculated with the original password and the hash that was calculated with just you changing that one character. It's 100% different. So hashing helps us also validate things. Like when you go to a website and you download a tool, a lot of times they'll publicly list out the hash value for that that application. And the reason they're doing that is so if I get something and I download it, if I put it through a calculated formula to output the hash, if it compares with what's publicly listed on the site of the application owner, then I know that somebody hasn't tampered with that application. All right, and then the last one there, they talk about availability. So availability means what are we doing to eliminate single point of failure, right? Because when it comes down to it, if we've got one switch, everybody's plugged up to it, if that switch, and this has happened before, gets hit by a box of Cheetos or something, Cheez-Its, and unplugs the actual switch and nobody can communicate, well, that's a big problem. So availability of a service is what are we doing to provide redundancy in our environment and fault tolerance. And then the last section there is safety. This is just for the Security Plus. So some of this stuff will be like physical security, like fences and lighting. A lot of those are there for different purposes. So lighting, one, it makes employees feel comfortable if they go into like a dark parking lot or something like that and the lights are there. But it helps with CCTVs because not all CCTVs have great infrared or ability to have night vision, stuff like that. So with those lights, they also supplement some of the ability to see what's going on in those areas. And so a lot of that's physical security. Same thing goes with things like locks, obviously. There's various different locks. I'll give you a classic example how I use a lock on a pen test. Have you guys ever seen those little cipher locks that they have on doors that with the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever? If anybody ever thinks that that's secure, it's totally not. Because what I bought on Amazon a UV light, a UV pen, and all I have to do is I carry around a little black light with me. Is early or sometime I'll drop by and I'll put my my highlighter. Imagine it's like a highlighter across all 4 of those numbers, and then I just wait. And then over time, I can see what the pattern is that they're using. So I just come back with my little light, see what it is, and then I go out, work out what the pattern or what the options would be, and find my way in. So now they have actual cipher locks that actually the numbers, it's a digital panel, so the numbers actually mix up. They don't always 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and stuff like that. They kind of mix up, and you have to change where you actually touch on the screen. All right. So I'm gonna let you guys, because I know it's getting late. It's already 10:10. I'm going to let you guys look real quick. I'm looking at 3, but I don't think we're going to be able to finish all of 3 by 10:30. So what I'd like to do is let's go ahead and let's at least start into it. There's about 3.8 sections. So look at 3, the starting one, which is 3.1 through 3.4. Give it a second. I'm going to come back here in about 5 minutes, and then we're going to go over the ones you guys want to talk about. So let's do that. Give it a second just to look at those real quick, and then we'll go there. All right, what do you guys got there? You see anything there that might be something you guys want to talk about or discuss? One big thing I'll say in that malware section, which is the first section, is they want you to be able to identify the differences. So a rootkit is not the same thing as a Trojan, is not the same thing as adware. So really knowing the differences is really the big part. A virus is not the same thing as a worm.
What is polymorphic malware and an armored virus?
All right, so those are all different types of viruses. In general, when it says something like malware, it could be more than just viruses. But generally, for the test, they'll want you to know that there is polymorphic and monomorphic viruses that are out there. And so polymorphic, basically here the idea is stealth is the key, right? So if it's a virus that gets onto a system, the longer that it can remain on that system, obviously the better for the bad guy. And so ultimately what the goal of a polymorphic virus or of polymorphic virus is to avoid detection by doing things that change the underlying code of the malware. Now how does it do this? Well, it has this thing called, and this is real nerdy stuff, but it has this thing called the mutation engine. And what the mutation engine does is it actually changes the bits. So if there's an active scanning of the system that's happening, by the time the scanning comes through and the signature a database is updated, it has older signatures. It can kind of already be changed and keep evolving and moving forward. So the ultimate goal of a polymorphic virus is to avoid detection by constantly altering its code. And an armored virus, basically what it does is when it gets onto a system, ultimately the goal of it is to have a surface area that basically looks ordinary, and a lot of this falls under the same camp as something almost like a rootkit does, or some characteristics that even maybe a Trojan does. So the aspect of an ARM virus is when it gets onto a system, it looks like it's ordinary code on the outside, but the intended virus is actually contained within. And so ways that it can do that through encapsulation and coding, various different types of methods to avoid detection is the ultimate goal of those two types of viruses that are out there. And there's lots more. There's macro viruses. There's a cavity virus. There is a companion virus. So there's a lot of different viruses. They will, as you guys go through some of these certifications, they will go more in detail of some of those different viruses that are out there. Just really kind of understand that there's more than one type, right? Different viruses that do different things. I know one big thing with viruses to know, especially different from worms. Worms do not require any kind of activation, whereas if you look at the three parts of a virus, there is the activation mechanism, the replication mechanism, and the payload. So a virus will require you to interact with it as a user, and so that's why it's always a safer bet to download something and then scan it before you actually run it, because if you run it, then you're interacting with the virus, whereas a worm, it doesn't work off those same rules. But that's definitely one big thing different-wise between a virus and a worm, is a worm does not require interaction and a virus does. All right, do you guys see it? Go ahead, sorry.
Under 3.3, whaling and vishing.
Oh yeah, so those are all social engineering terms. So vishing is when somebody calls you up on the phone and they say, are you having a problem with your computer right now? And then they try to get you into believing that, oh yeah, you've got a virus. And there's a lot of Microsoft support scam calls going around right now where they'll call you and they try to, say your computer's infected and it's got all these things. And it's a smash and grab kind of technique, right? Overall, and the reason it's phishing is because it's voice over IP phishing, right? In most cases is where we do something like that. And then whaling is where it's a class of phishing where we're target phishing senior level executives. So versus the the lonely person or the department head, we're looking for the highest of the high because there's a good chance that these guys, they get to bypass policies, they get to make their own stuff up, so they're not governed as much as other employees. And so if we can get them, that bigger fish obviously gives us higher level of access to the environment.
3.4 war chalking and blue snarfing.
Okay, so those are wireless attacks. So let's talk with Bluetooth first. So I don't know if you guys know, but there's a SANS instructor that does the wireless, and it's really good. His name is Joshua Wright, and if you look him up, he's got plenty of stuff on YouTube. One of the videos he has is how you can actually go through the process of listening in on somebody's Bluetooth conversation by connecting to their Bluetooth headset or interacting with it too. So you can actually send them like I see you or something like that where they got their headset or something on, whatever. So blue snarfing is actually first attempting to do a ping of Bluetooth. So your goal there of a ping is to see if you can connect to something. So that's the same thing a blue snarf is. You're trying to see, can I connect to a device that's into discover mode? And if you can, then there's ways you can spoof your Bluetooth device and try to get in conversation with that other Bluetooth device to start transferring communications between the two. So it's an attack against Bluetooth. Go ahead.
What was the name of the YouTuber?
I would look up Joshua Wright is the video. I'm trying to see the I don't have the link and it's getting late, but yeah, he has an interesting. Now the tool he uses is a tool called Car Whisper, and like I said, what it does is it allows you to spoof your headset so you can basically then connect to the Bluetooth headset as if you were connecting to a device, and then listen in on the conversation as the person's talking with the Bluetooth device, and then also send audio as well to the device. But there's a lot of Bluetooth attacks out there. Blue diving is a very useful tool when it comes to Bluetooth exploration. And the problem with Bluetooth is a lot of times, one, we can spoof devices. So I can say, I'm your headset, and or try to connect to your phone. And then the problem is the PIN number. Usually the PIN number of these devices is really dumb. It's a 000 or 111 or something real simple. So it's, there's not a lot of security there that's built in there. And it's easy if I can send you a request to connect and you see it on your phone and you think it's your Bluetooth headset, and so you click OK or allow this device, and then now I'm connected to you. So a lot of times you rely on users just interacting and doing stupid things. You can look up Bluetooth snipers. It's basically a Bluetooth device antenna that can scale to a larger perimeter range than something you would get with standard Bluetooth. So now I can start taking my Bluetooth attacks larger than that limited 30 feet or whatever it is for Bluetooth. And then war chalking is an attack against Wi-Fi, where basically you look for open Wi-Fi or Wi-Fi that's around your area, and then you basically graffiti around that area so that others know how to connect to your Wi-Fi. So if I'm a hacker and I'm a bad guy, whatever, and I discover what your web password is or your password is, and I use some chalk, and that's what it is, sidewalk chalk, and I put that around you somewhere that somebody could walk by easily and connect, then that's the idea, is it's a type of attack against Wi-Fi. You guys see any other ones there? Kind of wrapping up here.
Back in farming, that is sending out mass phishing emails. Is that right?
Right. That's 100% what it's used for. And so the idea would be, can I create something that's believable, right? And so with farming, your overall is, when you're doing phishing and stuff like that, is to create kind of a likable kind of scam, right? Win a free iPad or something like that. you get people to buy into it. And what farming does is it basically takes advantage of your ability to create a hosted domain within a what they call a grace period of 5 days. And then if you can find somebody that allows you to do that, you can basically build a site for the intended purpose of fishing, and then never pay for that site because you're canceling it before the overall grace period actually expires. So a lot of hosting companies will allow you to sign up for a domain, and then as long as you cancel it before the grace period, you're not paying anything. It's almost like a trial for a domain. So if I create something like, I don't know, I'm trying to think, apple.com, but it looks a little bit like apple.com. Maybe it's, myapplecare.com or whatever, and I can send out a bunch of phishing emails to people. All of those would be used directly targeted towards the people to try to extract stuff, right? So farming allows me to take advantage of that grace period and set up a domain that looks similar to the actual trusted domain. Does that make sense? Okay. Yeah, that's what that's for. And then typo squatting is another thing we'll do on Pentest. So a lot of people, they'll just mistype stuff. And if they're not careful with the mistyping stuff, obviously, and clicking on it and thinking it's the trusted resource, then that can also be used under that same type of attack scenario. So what we'll do for a company is we'll use a tool like Spiderfoot, not Spiderfoot. What is it called? Maybe it's Spiderfoot. No, I can't remember. Yeah, we'll use Spiderfoot as the tool, and we'll go off and actually scan a domain and look for other domains that have similar, maybe switch characters or maybe something similar to that domain that we're looking at, and help them to blacklist some of that so that the users don't get stuck on clicking on a link that looks like a legitimate link.
Josh, you got anything you're curious about, or?
Well, one thing, guys, because we're getting low on time, I think I'm going to share out with the group a little bit of test prep. I was hoping we'd get to some test prep tonight because it's so late. I don't know if we'll get to it tonight. So when the next couple days, I'll go ahead and I'll send over to Corey the test prep, and you guys can just pull it. It's just an EXE. I don't know if it works cross-platform. I know it works on Windows, but you can install it, and the nice thing about the test prep is it'll let you go through each section like we're doing here and then see kind of where your weak points are, so you can kind of build those up a little bit. And so I'll get that over to Corey so you guys can kind of look at that.
Cool. So I guess to kind of wrap up, Josh, Robert, Tim, do y'all have any questions before we head off?
No, I'm good, guys. That was a good cross section for the night.
Yeah.
Okay.
Ralph, what are you thinking as far as the next session goes?
So what I want to do is I'm going to get you guys the test prep, but I'd also like to do some more like exercise-driven stuff, not just all content. So really, and we probably won't do it next week because I know I've got to teach a class out of town next week. But I do want to make sure that you guys in the next week start looking at some of this stuff in these next coming sections. So like I know we're going to probably finish up 3, and we'll probably get in and finish up 4. Hopefully that, if you look over those sections, I'm going to look over them too. If you find out that one of these you'd like to see a little bit more discovery on, maybe an exercise or something like that, let me know. That way ahead of time I can kind of set up something that's more driven for that particular concept, so we can explore that some too. But definitely look over that section just to see if there's anything, and I'll get you guys the test prep in the next week too.
Okay. I guess just give me a date whenever you kind of feel comfortable, and we'll go from there. I mean, it doesn't always have to be on Tuesdays. I know it's kind of what we've been sticking to, but.
Well, you guys be thinking. I'm thinking for me it'd be fine on the Tuesday of the Christmas week, but I don't know how everybody else is. If everybody's going out of town, I don't want to make that have to be a thing. So you guys be thinking about it, and we'll just kind of keep the discussion going. I'm fine for that week, Tuesday. but I just want to make sure you guys are too. So we'll talk more about that, and I'll get you guys the files and stuff like that this week.
Cool. Sounds good.
And the same thing for the review. I'll be putting together a review of some of the content we talked about tonight, and more of a like what we did earlier with the document, something like that.
Yeah, I really liked that. Just
Okay.
You know.
All right, we'll do that.
Cool. All
Sounds
right, well, guys, thanks for coming. Thanks for doing this again, Ralph.
Awesome, man. Sounds good.
All right, thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
All right, I'll see you later.
All right, y'all. See ya.